Dan Ivas, Managing Director at Webbish Securities. Thanks so much for chatting with us. As you know, Elon Musk bought a 9.2% stake in Twitter. That's about $73 million, becoming that company's largest shareholder. What's driving him to make that big jump into tech?
Look, I mean, this is really the start of what I believe is going to be a more activist role for Musk at Twitter. He's not been no secret. I mean, social media, he's not happy in terms of the Twitter platform. Twitter itself has been lagging from a subscriber and advertising. If there was a time to strike, this was it. And I believe that Musk is going to ultimately force some significant changes at Twitter in the coming months.
Because he has been very vocal about being censored on Twitter. So you think that's what it's all about, just forcing change at Twitter?
Yeah, I think it starts with freedom of speech and the filtering on the Twitter platform. But ultimately, I think it's broader here in terms of how Musk is looking at the social media platform. Clearly, him building and the team building from the ground up is almost impossible. So they need to go for an existing platform. Then you look at Twitter. I mean, this is a company that's lagged significantly. I think was due for change. And now it's Wall Street sort of signaling. I mean, they view it that Musk is really going to enact some significant changes to Twitter.
Interesting. So making big changes at the top with Jack Dorsey out, and this gives Musk an opening, you think?
I think there was a clear window that Musk could go after Twitter. With Dorsey going into the background, now he's the #1 ownership stake of Twitter. Investors have been frustrated. It was a perfect storm. Now, clearly, there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered in terms of how he ultimately is going to go about change. But clearly, this is just the first step in what's going to be a broader Game of Thrones going on versus Twitter between him and Musk.
Isn't that interesting? Because obviously he has plenty of day jobs, right? With Tesla, with SpaceX, with Hyperloops. Adding this to the feather of his cap, do you think he's stretching himself too thin, or do you think he has a clear path where he wants to take this company?
Yeah, I think with Elon, there always seems like chaos, but behind the scenes, there is, in his own way, a clear path. And I think when it comes to social media, I mean, this is something he feels passionate about. It's not necessarily monetary in terms of what he's going after. Really wants to enact change. I think Twitter, I think there's clearly going to be strategic changes on the horizon. And we believe this could result in ultimately Twitter getting sold, either partially in terms of ownership by Musk or some broader activism.
Interesting. I'm hoping you can drill down a little bit on what you think what changes you might see with Musk owning this almost 10% stake.
Yeah, I think the biggest changes, especially once he ultimately probably gets on the board, it's going to be filtering of the platform. I mean, if you look from a subscriber perspective and advertising, Twitter and the social media arms race, they've been losing. TikTok, Instagram, and others. So there's some algorithmic changes they're going to make. Their freedom of speech is obviously, a hot button issue, right? In terms of the filtering on the Twitter platform, who's good, who could ultimately be censored. And that's something Musk is clearly going to be focused on going forward. I think the average user will not see any changes, but as Musk becomes more involved with Twitter, this is something that I think could change the platform and ultimately could put under the control of either Musk and potentially some other partners like private equity or some other sort of strategic changes that clearly are going to be on the horizon.
So you've covered Tesla, you've covered Musk for years. We know he can be surprising, and he doesn't run his company as some conventional ones are. But were you surprised by this, that he just all of a sudden bought almost 10% of the company?
Yeah, I mean, this is clearly a surprise to us, to the street, that, there was no surprise that he was going to go after social media. The fact that he went after with a 9.2 stake, passive, that's just planting the flag, clearly going to step it up to active. I think this also comes at a time that Tesla is really in full gear. Supply chain issues are there. SpaceX is obviously in the midst of some massive endeavors. So, the timing's interesting. But as we've seen with Elon Musk, I mean, it's someone where he goes to the beat of his own drum. And this was clearly the time that he was going to go after Twitter.
I just want to drill down a moment, because you said this is a passive stake. You suspect it's going to be active soon. So you think he's going to buy up more shares of Twitter?
Yeah, I think there's a better chance of me playing in the Masters this weekend than Musk staying passive ownership. So he will clearly go active, likely 15% for starters in terms of as a percent ownership. And then that really enacts to get on the board. Behind the scenes, they're going to have to engage with Twitter. And now we'll see if Twitter, if they ultimately come with open arms, or this becomes a more hostile situation.
And that's the big question, and something to look at in the future. I mean, obviously, we know why Musk might be motivated. He's been fighting with U.S. security regulators over his ability to post Tesla news on Twitter. He also mused about launching his own platform. So you think with what he has so far with Tesla and SpaceX, we can put, tech giant behind his name too?
Well, I think clearly, I mean, he's going after this. I think he recognizes that there's an opportunity. It's going to be a balancing act. I mean, in terms of not just from a regulatory perspective, in terms of the Twitter platform, which has gotten him issues before, but also a lot of balls at the same time that they're trying to juggle between Tesla, SpaceX, and Twitter. But Musk, 300 billion behind him, can really do anything he wants. He's from an ownership perspective. And clearly, this is probably the first step in what's going to be a broader issue, as well as endeavor here at Twitter.
Okay, and I'm just going to wrap up here. You talked about the reaction on the street, but from a shareholder perspective, they're obviously very excited about this. Can you touch on it again, why you think they're jazzed about Twitter with Elon Musk making the play he did?
Yeah, Twitter investors are battered, bruised. They have scrapes everywhere. I mean, it's been a brutal stock relative to what's happened in social media. I think they've lost clearly a growth step. So from investors, I mean, this was kind of a Cinderella story that Musk could come in, enact changes. And it's something where I think the stock reaction speaks for itself because investors feel like ultimately more strategic changes on the horizon with a potential buyout, potentially, further down the crystal ball.
What are you looking ahead at? What's the one thing you're going to be watching closely in the weeks ahead when it comes to Twitter and when it comes to Tesla?
Yeah, the next step's going to be Twitter's reaction. What the board officially puts out is their sort of statement, as well as also does Musk go above that 10% threshold in the coming weeks?